Our next session today is on the learning gap that we have seen in the past 3 years and how we can move towards bridging it. We have Sreehari Ravindranath, Associate Director, Research and Impact at Dream a Dream, to lead this space for us. Sreehari is a researcher keen on policy change and advocacy, focusing on evidence-based reform in education. Welcome, Sreehari. Over to you to begin the session.
Thank you. Anu. I was just listening to these narratives and some of the experience that our kids are actually going through. Just quickly share my screen. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind words, Anu. I think, I'm picking up on some of this conversation which is there in the chat itself, what is something that we are expecting out of our educational system now. It's more about support that the kids would like to have, the emotional support that they are talking about, the more active listening from teachers and other stakeholders, etc. And I think that's a perfect context for me also to begin. So where, when we are talking about rebuilding the future or bridging the gap, it's so something that we are proposing or something that we would like to invite to discuss is more around thriving as the purpose of education. And I'm pretty sure, any of this discussion that we are having today or all these discussions in the last 2 years in different platforms, different forums, we can't avoid, these are some of the keywords that we are always talking about. The challenge that we are facing because of school closures and the learning that moved into online and the whole problem of digital divide, how many of our kids are actually able to access internet or access learning through online modes, and the whole conversation around learning gaps that we are talking about. It could be learning gaps, unfinished learning, or it could be learning loss, etc. And something that we are very sure in the last 2 years is that there is a big crisis in the education system and we are trying to rebuild. And it's also an opportunity for us to see how we can rebuild the education or rebuild the future. And there is an opportunity in that way as well. I also would like to share an experience that I went through, and I think I've been talking about this in different platforms because it affected me a lot, and it also took me a long time to process and move on. Few months back when the school reopened again, I was part of a research study and I visited one of the school in Rajasthan. And before the study, what I wanted to do is just to build a rapport in the classroom as any external person going to the classroom. I just asked them to pick a paper, write your name, and what is your dream? What you wanted to become, something on that, if you can actually write. And I was waiting for them to start writing. And I was just roaming around the classroom, and typically, I'm very eager to know what is happening. So someone who is sitting in front of my class, I was just watching her start writing, and I was just keep on waiting, and she was not writing. So I thought, the question around what is your dream or what you wanted to become is very complex, and probably just to ease that process, I told her, you can even draw something that you wanted to, what you wanted to express, etc. And I can still see that hesitation in her that, she was not able to start writing. She was not able to write her name and anything in that paper. And that was a big realization. And it was disheartening for me to know that it was all around. She was actually recollecting alphabets. She was not able to actually write her name on that piece of paper. And I asked her, have you been into the online classes or any education in the last 2 years? And she was not being part of any online classes, any intervention from anyone in that area. And that was something that it was not something that I can actually process well. A child who is trying to recollect alphabets to write her name was something that really intensify what we are talking about in terms of learning gaps or the crisis that we are talking about. It also reflects on the process that how much it has affected children adversely. Like, so if you talk about the adverse childhood experience, this 2 years also been a milestone, or it is also been part of their experience in terms of moving with their life. And so from the charts that we are also talking about, the emotional support, etc. So how much it has negatively impacted their social emotional skills. Uh, so like as a psychologist, if I look at the trend in terms of clients coming up or parents coming with their kids, they wanted to know how they can actually make the child more proactive, or they can how to tackle these social inhibitions, and the kids who doesn't wanted to be participating in any activities or in any games now. So it's all talking about how the child's social and emotional skills, the gap that we also created in terms of their well-being or their social emotional skills, it's also it's very alarming. I'll say all this have a very tremendous impact on their long life if we are not having a correct intervention or an intervention at this point. And if you look at the other marginalized groups, kids coming, children with special needs, or the kids of migrant workers who moved back to their native, refugees, ethnic minorities who absolutely have not gone through any of this curriculum or any schooling or any classroom intervention, they are kind of outliers to the whole system. And if you look at how serious this COVID learning gaps are, so the whole conversation, the world is talking about learning poverty as another index. And luckily, India is not on the safer side at this point, but this deficit that we have created, or the gap that we have created because of the crisis, we may be we will be going into the index of learning. And I was not very much aware about this story of Sheetal and many that we have actually seen. The loss of learning during pandemic is very alarming. Like the study by Asim Premji, which talks about 92% of the kids who forgot even the language skills, or they also lost the ability to do mathematics, etc. It's something really disturbing. And some of the other reports that talks about over, let's say, around 300 million children have not stepped into any classes for the last 2 years. And imagine a child who skipped her 5th standard and 6th standard is directly moving into a 7th standard. And we are actually going, the education system is more resilient in a way that, we are just going with the curriculum, or we are focusing more on the learning outcomes. Did we actually looked at the well-being or the social emotional needs of these kids? Did we look at when the child have to go back into re-enter into learning space? Did we also ensure that child's mental health or the anxiety that they are having or the fear that they are also bringing into the classroom is dealt very well? And the whole system that we are talking about post-COVID, we are pretty sure it is basically a K-shaped recovery that we are looking at. And that reality also brings us very distinctively few features. One is there is an absolute disconnect between the role of education and how we are shaping our society. The crisis also bring an emergency or urgency thinking about, the learner's resilience. And did our holistic education or the way we were dealing with education really dealt with the social and emotional needs of kids? And how inclusive and equitable was our education system? And are we planning for a recovery which is more equity-based and inclusive? And what we need to do, when we talk about future of education, or when we talk about how we can bridge the gap, we can't go with an organic ways or organic strategies to deal with this issue. We are really looking forward for a leapfrogging strategies. We need non-organic drastic measures to actually deal with this crisis, because the deficit or the widening learning gap that we are talking about really need to be addressed at the earliest, or at the as it should be something that we have to deal as an urgency. And learning should also focus, it should consider, it's a realm that actually talks about loving, belonging, well-being, or care for children. And we also have to shift that mindset in terms of how we think about the purpose of education, why, the what of education, for whom, and what is, and towards what end that we are looking at education. We really need to have a fundamental change in the way that we are looking at education. And our very linear or a very narrow ways of describing success, we really, really have to redefine the idea of success. It's not just based on marks or grades or how you perform in the classroom will become the indicator of success. And we also have to do around the competencies which are very localized wisdoms and the context being looked into. So because we have the global awareness that we have to create in our kids and the competency that we have to create, which are more culturally relevant. And when we talk about what we need to do and how we can actually do that process, some of the ways I think that I wanted to share here is around focusing more on learning as a whole being. It should be around more about thriving and universal well-being. So the whole education system for a long time started thinking more in terms of focusing on subjects, focusing on how we can how to improve the learning outcomes. Yes, that's all important, but how we are also contributing to the society or the universal well-being that we are talking about. And something in the opening session that we are talking about, the agency that we have to create in children, how better we can prepare children for the uncertainties, or what we call it as the world that we are actually going into. And we also have to engage young people, they should get the learning should be experiential, it should be enjoyable, it should be they should be part of the core, they should be part of learning. They should be co-owners of learning, we will say. And the whole system that we focus about, grades, marks, and getting a placement, can we broaden the measures of success in life? It's so everybody thrive in different ways. So getting a good grade or being successful in life or getting a meaningful engagement, everything is actually thriving. So can we broaden that measures of success in life? And we also have to look at a very multi-layered, multiple stakeholders involvement when we are actually looking at ecosystem or creating or designing an ecosystem which is more enabling children to thrive. So it include parents, which include teachers, the ecosystem players, and also the non-governmental organizations, civil society, leaders in the field of education, etc., coming together, collaborating on trying to understand and redefining the measures of success. And technology, we are talking about technology a lot, how technology can enable or scale some of our interventions, and focusing that it should not overpower what we are trying to do. It is something that enable us to reach out to people. And how highly personalized or facilitative driven learning environments can be actually created. And the ecosystem, which is not working in silos, it is more collaborative, it is looking from an intersectional lens. It is more from a community driven, so there are studies that we talk about, how an education system also expand to community, build the resilience of the education system. And our invitation, as I said, it is more about relooking or reimagining the future of education from the lens of thriving. So what does this thriving looks like, or what does that thriving means to a young person? How an ecosystem or a system can enable thriving, and what happens when we are actually looking at redefining success in terms of thriving. One, the system start the ethos that enable thriving. One is that more acceptance, the kids coming from diverse background, coming from different communities, different stories that they bring in, how system or a school or a classroom is accepting those facts, how much trust that we are able to build between a teacher and a learner, and the caring adult, the role of a teacher moving. It's not the expertise in terms of subject matters. It is also about how empathetic or how caring the adults becomes, where you give a holding space or a psychological space. And that space, the classroom, when it becomes a holding space, it is more about, which gives an opportunity for learners or students to make mistake, but there is a trust that we are already able to build. There is an empathetic communication that happens between the teacher and the student. So the child is able to make mistake. They are able to make mistakes or challenges, or they can even fail in that system, but they know that there are people who is backing them up or making them more resilient and helping them to thrive. And if you look at the thriving, thriving empowers children. One is they will never give up. We really want our kids to be more resilient. They should be prepared. They should adapt, adjust, and become more resilient to any challenges that they are going to face. They also realize once they are accepted, when there is a trust that we are able to build with the kid, they also realize their own potentials. The area of they understand about themselves. They broaden their idea of self, and operating also from a place of stability. When there is a holding space that we are able to provide, the stories or the experience that they have at their home or their community, which is also being accepted, listened, tackled, or mentored by the teachers, there is also a place of well-being or stability where they can actually think through. It also helps them to manage very difficult challenges and scenarios. When we talk about life skills, we always say it helps children to deal with challenges. And as adults, we know that every day is a challenge, or every day we have to deal with different kind of challenges. How we are actually going to do that and find solutions to the challenges one face. So when we are able to enable a system which is more thriving, and this is what we looks like, when we are able to do that in young children. And what happens when thriving becomes the purpose of education? There will be a connect, like a close connection between the real world and the, the society or the way in which we are living. We learn to have more interconnectedness. The experience of COVID also realized that, we work more collaboratively, we try to reach out, we seek help from others. There'll be more interconnectedness that can be promoted. And education obviously becomes more inclusive and equitable, and that works for every child. And when we look at thriving as the purpose of education or thriving as the future of education, we're not just trying to prepare children for the future challenges, but we are also shaping for a better society. We develop an interconnected, intersectional lens in our life, society, and our planet, which means we are not just looking at it, we were looking at a child-centric approach. We also have the larger ecosystem around us. And we also have a planetary system around us, how as a child, I'm also able to connect with that universal well-being, or how much I'm able to relate to a challenge which is happening in the larger ecosystem, like the climate crisis, which is happening around, or the violence or the communal issues which are happening around. How I make meaning out of these challenges, and how I will be able to contribute to, towards those challenges is also something we look at when we are bridging the gap through the lens of thriving. And our experience, I would say, when we are able to make children, enabling children to thrive, what we realize, they become more resilient. Their inner strength or their grit or their sense of overcoming difficulty and their resilience is built around. They are more responsible. They make responsible decision making, or they take informed choices. And most importantly, we want every child to be happy and feel, which gives a sense of their own better version, how they can actually live in their own terms and be happy with their with themselves and with their surroundings. And my final thoughts, it's around, we need to further explore and articulate as individuals how we can be the enablers. We are all educators or working with the education system, how we can further explore and articulate how as an individual I will be able to as an enabler for redefining success and supporting people to thrive. Because the thing that we have seen, we want every child to thrive, or we wanted them to flourish in this world, despite of the challenges and the obstacles or the problems that they are going through, they will be much more happy. They will be much more resilient to deal with this, and they are more responsible towards the society and towards more towards the universal well-being that we are talking about. Thank you so much. That's from my side.